Hello, my name is John Bushy and I am an owner of a 7-ton truck, and today I'm going to show you how to change the transmission fluid. So first I should probably give you a little bit of background. I bought my 7-ton truck from the United States Marine Corps and through GovPlanet. The unfortunate thing about GovPlanet and the Marine Corps is they don't really tell you the whole story on the truck, and so when you buy a truck, you're kind of taking a chance on what's wrong and, if you're going to be able to fix it. So when I bought my truck, I kind of looked around carefully, but I had a budget, and so I didn't buy the most expensive truck. In fact, I bought one that was a pretty good deal at the time. And I had looked through everything. The horn didn't work, the heater didn't work, some things like that, and I thought I can do that, no problem. And I was hoping that everything else was okay, like the engine and the transmission. And basically, the truck worked. In fact, I drove it home from California to Utah, and everything worked okay. Since then, I've fixed a lot of stuff. But even in the beginning, the transmission wasn't working perfectly, and I'll show you. We'll do a test drive and I'll show you what I mean. And so I knew the transmission wasn't quite 100% working the way it should. I checked the fluid when I bought it. Unfortunately, when I bought the truck, it was the middle of the winter, and I guess checking the transmission fluid in the middle of the winter doesn't work as well as checking it in the summer. So now it's spring, and I've checked it again because I continue to have transmission problems. And now I can see there's a lot of stuff in there, including what seems to be water and maybe some rust. So that's why I'm going to completely change the transmission fluid. And we need some things from the store in order to get started. And one thing we need is automatic transmission fluid. Now, I know if you're on Steel Soldiers, Elijah and Micha, they both have some pretty strong feelings about what kind of transmission fluid to use. The Marines use 15W40, basically engine oil, diesel engine oil for everything. It's in the engine, it's in the transmission, it's in a lot of the parts, the moving parts. I'm using the automatic transmission for a couple of reasons. Number one, I'm having problems, and so whatever the fluid's in there, it might be the cause of the problems. So I want to switch it out. The second reason is that I saw in some technical publications that you can run the 15W40 as the Marines do, but in some cases you can actually run the transmission fluid also. It's a transmission. My thinking is it should have transmission fluid in it. So anyway, that's what I'm going to be using today, and I'm going to see if it fixes my problem. In any case, I'm not going to leave it in there very long, so maybe it doesn't really matter what I use. I just want to flush the system out. Speaking of flushing, I'm going to use some Seafoam. Now, Seafoam, I've used Seafoam in other vehicles. This is specifically for a transmission, and they have two different cans. I'm not sure what the difference is between these two. They seem to be the same thing. So Seafoam for the transmission. I've used it in other vehicles, and it's a really good cleaner, I'll tell you that. In a motorcycle I used it on, it cleaned things so well that I started getting leaks. It ate away some of the gaskets and hoses and things like that. So again, I'm not going to leave it in very long. I've had kind of a bad experience with Seafoam, the engine type, and so I'm not going to leave any of this stuff in very long. The last thing that I'm going to use is the filters for the transmission, of course. It's an Allison transmission. This is the first type, the early type of transmission, because my truck is a 2003. And I was lucky enough on GovPlanet to pick up some of the semi-annual service kits. And so I have kits that include all kinds of things, including the transmission filters. And these filters actually, if you can read this on the video, are the old type. These are the gold type filters, and they don't use these anymore. Allison recommends you don't use these. I'm going to use them because I have them on hand, and I'm not planning on leaving the filters in there very long either. I don't know how long, I don't know how many miles. I'll leave all this stuff in there, but within a short time, a couple thousand miles probably, I'll take all this stuff out and replace it with some other fluid. And speaking of fluid, I should probably show you the fluid that's in there now. And so let's run out to the truck and I'll show you what's going on. Okay, here we are at the truck, and it turns out it's really windy today, so maybe not the best day to change transmission fluid, but I'm going to try it. So this is my truck, a truck like many other of the 7-ton series, and the transmission dipstick is right here, and so this is where we're going to check the fluid to fill it. You actually fill it from up there. I'll show you that later. And boy, it is so windy. I'm not convinced that I'm going to be able to do much, and my camera may go flying, but let's try and do this and see what happens. By the way, the oil, or the transmission dipstick, is about 5 feet long, and I'm not kidding, and it's quite difficult to get it out, and it's a lot more difficult to get it in. So let's pull it out. It locks on there, so you got to give it a quarter turn to unlock it, and then you just pull it out. Keep pulling, keep pulling. Okay, here it is. And yeah, I guess you can't really see it very well, so let me take a sample here, and then I will continue the video indoors rather than out here. Okay, I went into the garage because I was afraid you couldn't hear me and the camera might flip over. So here's the oil sample that I took. I actually took 2 of them from the transmission. And, you know, the fluid that's in there doesn't really look like the 1040 weight oil that's in the engine. It might be, but I don't know. Especially over here, it looks a little bit reddish, like it's regular transmission fluid. And you can see here too, where the fluid got spread out a little bit. Looks pretty red to me, like transmission fluid. Now that could be rust, and there are some black specks in there and stuff, but I think that's just paint. So I'm not too worried about that. There is this kind of brownish color, which a lot of things could explain that. One of them, it could be rust from inside the transmission. I know a lot of the parts are aluminum, but there's still steel gears in there and the friction plates and stuff like that. So anyway, that's what concerned me, is the color, and the brownness could mean that there's some water. Oh, and you can't see it on the rag, unfortunately, but when I pulled the dipstick out, there certainly was some milkiness, especially on the top of the dipstick, and so that to me would indicate that there's water mixed in there, and that's what I want to get out. So anyway, that's the sample, and that's the reason for my concerns. And so now I'm going to go start up the truck and warm it up, and I'll show you what the transmission is doing that has me concerned. Okay, here we are in the 7-ton, and it's a little bit noisy, some things are vibrating, but this is the transmission control and 7th gear, which is the highest gear the truck will go into. You can change that, but the transmission control unit seems to work just fine. The problem is, I'll take this corner, is when we're actually driving, the transmission doesn't start out in 1st gear. The transmission starts out in 2nd gear, and then it will shift to 3rd, 4th, 5th, so on. So here we are, and I'll get on this road, and I'll start accelerating, and you'll notice that the 2nd gear, it stays in 2nd gear a long time. Here we are, see, it still hasn't shifted. There. finally shifted. And actually it shifted again. So we're in 4th gear right now. So 2nd gear it stays in way too long. Sorry, the road's a little rough. And 3rd gear it stays in for just a second and then quickly shifts into 4th. So that's the issue I've been chasing, and hopefully some fresh fluid will make a difference. I forgot to mention one thing, and here's a quick update too. The thing I forgot to mention is you need 10 to 12 gallons of the transmission fluid. And I also drove the truck around to get it warmed up, and after I did that, then I decided to check the fluid again. And so here's the results after, and it actually looks a lot better. There's still a little bit of blackness, but they had painted the oil or the dipstick for the transmission, and I saw that some of the black paint was coming off the dipstick. So I think that's all that is. And the regular transmission fluid now, yeah, it still seems a little brown, but the redness, the rusty stuff is gone now. At least it seems to be diminished. So, you know, maybe a piece of advice is if you have one of these trucks, check your transmission fluid both hot and cold, because you might see some interesting results when it's cold, like foaming water or foaming that would indicate water. So yeah, I feel a little better now, but I'm still going to go ahead and change all the fluids and filters and add that cleaner solution in there. And that's the, also the fluid levels are correct. They weren't too high, they weren't too low. They're right where they should be. So now I'll get to changing the transmission fluid. Okay, so now we're under the truck and I'm looking up at the transmission. This is the transmission here, and that's one of the filters. So the front of the truck is off that way, the motor, all that kind of stuff is that way. Right here is the transmission pan, and you can see the two filter. This is one of the filters, and this is the other filter access. And then this thing here is the drain pan, or the drain plug itself. Now, I've put some heaters on here because I live in a really cold environment, and in the winter, boy, this truck doesn't like to go. So, I installed a heater. Your truck probably won't have that. And there's the two filter access covers. Those take a 15 millimeter. I guess I should tell you what I've got ready here. So I do have a can of air, and what I do is I use that to clean off the oil filter covers and around the drain plug to make sure that, you know, no oil or no dirt and stuff gets inside. And then here's the wrench I'm using with the 3/8 inch end on it. Now that's important because the drain plug itself takes a 3/8. My camera's not focusing here for some reason. There, so you just take your extension and stick it in there and turn it, and mine came off really easy. You also need a 15 millimeter socket, and that's to take off the filter bolts. One of my filter bolts is really loose. I think it was this one. And the rest of them are pretty tight, so I might have to try and use a tool. I couldn't get it just with my hand wrench, and so maybe I'll use some tool. Now I'm going to get ready, and I'm going to start to drain the oil, but it's really windy today, and I imagine it's going to go all over the place, so I'm not going to use my camera to actually film the process. I do have a couple of oil pans ready, and I've got a couple more because there will be 10 to 14 gallons, depending upon if you're changing filters and stuff like that. So okay, I'll let you know how it goes. Okay, I've pulled the drain plug and you can see it here. And there's a little bit of metal on the magnet. Let me move it around a little bit here. Not much though. I'm pleasantly surprised. Maybe I have to move it for you to see that. Or maybe I need to hold it more towards the camera. Okay, it's not working. But anyway, there isn't a lot of stuff on there. And so I think I'm pretty happy about that. I was afraid a lot of the rust and everything inside the transmission was worn parts, but I guess it's actually not. Boy, it does not want to focus on that. There. Yeah, so anyway, there isn't much. In fact, maybe I'll rub it on a rag and then show you later. But there isn't a lot there, and so I think that's good news that I don't have to worry about the inside of the transmission coming out. I have drained a little bit, and I'll show you that in a minute. And I'm a little bit concerned now that I think there's only like 8 gallons or something. There isn't very much fluid that's come out, and now it's really slow. So I think it's about done. So 8 gallons doesn't seem like enough. But anyway, I'll get back to work and make more video in a minute. Okay, another video on my status so far. So I've successfully drained most of the oil that's in the transmission, and I ended up using these 5-gallon buckets. I was going to try and use the regular oil drain pans, but the truck's so high and it's a little bit windy, so those pans didn't work out. So I just stuck some buckets under there. There's plenty of room. The oil drained in there. I think you can see in the video the problem is that it just didn't get very much fluid. For example, this bucket maybe has 4 gallons in it. This bucket has even less, maybe 3 gallons. So total of 8 gallons came out of the transmission. Now I did drop one of the filters, and so here's a little bit more, but you can see from the level there isn't that much. So if I add that oil to this oil, maybe there's 4 gallons. And so totally I've got 8 gallons, including one of the filters. By the way, the good news is the filter didn't have any metal chunks in it. The filter actually looked pretty clean, except for, this stuff. I'm not sure what that is. I really don't think that it's metal from inside the transmission, because you can also see some in the pan down there, kind of a reddish hue to it. I don't think it's rust because there wasn't that much on the magnet. Oh, and speaking of which, I did wipe it off onto a rag, and this is it. There just isn't much there. So I'm really happy about that. It may look like a lot in the video, but it's not very much at all. Oh, and I didn't mention the truck has about 30,000 miles on it, so there isn't that much mileage. I'm still a little bit concerned about what this fluid is. It definitely has kind of a red hue to it. It should be either 15W40, which is what the Marines put in there, or it should be transmission fluid, and this really doesn't seem to be either one. I guess maybe you can't tell in the video. The colors aren't showing up very good. But yeah, so more good news and bad news. The good news is the filter, this is one of 2. I haven't taken out the other one yet. Looks very clean, very good. The fluid, there just wasn't enough fluid. Speaking of the fluid, maybe, I guess what I could do is let's just taste some of this stuff. Looks good. No, that's definitely 15W40. So no transmission fluid in there. It's a little bit gritty. I can taste something. Maybe it's sand. Maybe some sand got in there. Oh, it's about 2 years old. Well, 3.5, I'd say 3.5 years old. Um, and by the way, I'm a professional. Do not taste your oil at home. So anyway, I'll get back to work changing the oil. I'll probably make a video of pulling out the filter next.
Okay, I'm back. I reviewed the last segment and realized that I omitted a few things and I have to make some corrections. So I'm going to mention them now before I go fill the truck with oil. One thing that I forgot to mention is when you're getting ready to put the filter assembly, the filter and the cover and the 6 bolts back in, you should probably put some blue Loctite, the medium strength, on the bolts just to make sure they stay in there. Of course, if you're torquing it to specifications, maybe that's overkill, but it doesn't hurt to have overkill, especially if you're taking these trucks out 4-wheeling, 6-wheeling. You're in off-road situations where there's going to be a lot of vibrations and everything. It's not going to hurt to put some blue Loctite on those bolts. Also, one thing that I didn't make clear is that when you put the filter and the cover assembly into the transmission, because it has the 2 O-rings, it will kind of stick in there. So you can take that whole filter assembly and push it up into the transmission and kind of get it to stick in there. Then you have both your hands free to be able to work on the bolts and get the bolts in there. So you don't have to really use one hand to hold the assembly up onto the transmission and then try and work the bolts with one hand. It will stick in there if you push it in all the way. Another thing is that comes in the kit that I forgot to mention is it comes with a double page of instructions. And that's kind of nice. There's a lot of warnings in there, like there always is. But it also gives you the torque specs in there, and it has some other helpful tips and things in there. So there are instructions with the kit. Another thing that I'm getting ready to try is a pump. I got this at Harbor Freight, and it's just a transfer pump. I'm going to try it. It costs less than $10. I got it on sale. And I'm going to see if it can help put the fluid back into the transmission. I bought the transmission fluid in 5-gallon pails, and I have 2 of them. It's going to take 10 to 12 gallons. I'm not sure how much. I'm going to go see and then check the fluid level afterwards. So hopefully this pump will help get that fluid into the transmission. Otherwise, that could be a long and messy process also. Also, and this is a little bit embarrassing for me, I earlier said that my truck had 30,000 miles, and no, it doesn't. It actually has 13,500 miles on it, which, isn't bad. I purposely looked for a truck that had a few miles on it, and this truck, other than the transmission, has been pretty good. I fixed a lot of stuff, but right now I think the truck is running well, starting well. I'm pretty happy with the truck. I was a little bit afraid of the trucks that only have 1,000 miles. If it's a 2003 truck and it only has 1,000 miles on it, that seems a little bit strange to me. So hopefully with my truck they used it. The engine didn't get a bunch of rust in it because it was just sitting around. The transmission got used once in a while, so that's why I look for trucks with a little bit of miles on them, more than 1,000. It's quite cool today outside. I think it's 58 degrees, 57, something like that, and there's a wind. So I am going to go and get ready to fill the truck, but I just wanted to make these corrections, and I'm going to go grab a jacket and some of the supplies I need, and then I'll fill the truck. All right, here we are at the truck, and I've started filling, and this pump seems to be working great so far. It's a little bit slow, but it's better than trying to dump it in there with a funnel. Oh, hey, by the way, I'm using my Bluetooth microphone. It's still kind of windy out here, and there's a lot of noise, so hopefully this Bluetooth microphone will cut down on some of the ambient noise, and you can actually hear me. So yeah, I've got the 5-gallon buckets. I put it on a box to get it up a little bit, and I'm just using this pump to pump it in to the fill tube. I pointed this out earlier. This is behind the cab, and it's right next to the air intake. So this is where you put the transmission fluid in order to go in. My fill tube down at the bottom down there has a little kink in it, so I'm hoping that all this fluid will actually go into the transmission and it won't start bubbling out of this fill tube here. I've got the 2 gallons ready. One thing that I decided to do is not put in the Seafoam now. I'm going to put in the new fluid, and I'm going to see how that goes. I'm interested to see what the problem is with the truck and be able to convey that to other people that may be having a similar problem. So I want to know what the problem is. And these trucks normally, when they come from the military, they're running 15W40 in there. I think just to make it easier for the Marines so they can have one fluid on hand and then they just put it everywhere. However, the manual states that in cold weather, you can use alternatives to the 15W40. Motor oil is what they put in the transmission. And it gets pretty cold here in Utah. In fact, today, even though it's nice and sunny and everything, and it's towards the middle of May, it's still 57 degrees. And it can get cold in the winter. So they've recommended that in cold weather, you run transmission fluid in the transmission. So that's what I'm going to try. I'm going to see if maybe my problem is cold weather related, or maybe that old fluid was just contaminated somehow. And so anyway, I'm going to put in new fluid. I'm going to use transmission fluid, and then I'm going to drive it around for a while and see if that solves the problem. If it doesn't, then I'll put the Seafoam in and see if that helps. And then if none of that helps, then I've got some other ideas of things that I could try. Hopefully this new fluid will make it run a lot better. I can hear the pumps working. In fact, I'll turn it off. Yeah, you can see the fluid coming back down the tube. This isn't a fast pump. You can see the fluid going up here, and then it makes it around the corner and goes in. So on the box it said like 6 quarts per minute or something. Yeah, I think maybe with this transmission fluid, because it's definitely thicker than water, it's going slower. And so we'll see how much. Oh yeah, there's still a lot of fluid in there, and it's been running for a couple of minutes. Now one thing, after I get this filled, there's one more thing that you should be aware of. Once you've put this in here and you've checked the fluid level and all that kind of stuff, you don't just jump in and take off and drive the truck. The recommendations that I've seen, both in the Allison manual and from other mechanics, is that you start up the truck, you let it idle for a little while, a couple minutes maybe, just to let the transmission kind of settle in. And then with the brakes still on, you put it into drive, and that will kind of activate parts of the transmission, get the fluid going around in there. Don't let the truck move, keep the brake on, and then shift into neutral. Let it sit there for a second, maybe a couple seconds, then shift into reverse, and that's going to put the fluid into the reverse channels. And do that a couple times, back and forth. Reverse to neutral, then to drive, drive to neutral, then to reverse. Just make sure that fluid's getting all around inside the transmission. Maybe let it idle for 10 minutes or something, just to make sure that the fluid's working its way around inside the transmission. And you should be doing your truck check anyway, before you take off. And then at that point, drive it around slowly. It wouldn't hurt after you've gone through the drive reverse sequence a few times to check the fluid again. It might be a little bit low. And then drive around moderately, and then check the fluid again after that. There is a way to check the fluid in the cab from the transmission control module, and I'll make a video of that too, showing that. But for now, I'm just going to sit here and wait for this pump to pump all the fluid into the transmission. So I'll let you know when it's done and give you an update.
Okay, first of all, I apologize for making this video so long. I never thought it would be this long. Um, and speaking of videos, Micha has a video also about changing the transmission oil, and his is a little more hands-on, and mine's maybe a little more philosophy. So you could check out that video also. After the last video, a couple of my buddies came by and they wanted to drive the 7-ton. They've driven it before. So we took off for a ride, and it was a good opportunity to kind of test it out and see the results. And actually, all three of us, I think, agreed that it did make a difference, that the truck did drive differently. It seemed smoother, it seemed to shift better. And that was right after the change, before it even had a chance to, work its way into the transmission. Also, I should mention that the battery pump, that red one with the hose that I was trying to put the fluid back in, that didn't work. It worked for a few minutes and then it just stopped pumping. I checked the batteries. Everything seemed to be fine with the batteries. Maybe the transmission fluid was just too thick and it kind of gave up. So I can't recommend using that. Now, I did put in too much oil. In earlier in this video, I said, oh, the truck takes 10 to 12 gallons. And according to the operator's guide, the manual from the Marines, that's how much it should take. Unfortunately, my transmission, for some reason, didn't do that. I did change both the filters, and I drained out all the other oil, but it ended up taking closer to 8 gallons. And so what I did is, on the passenger side below the door, there are a couple of valves there that you can turn, and it's used for getting oil samples. The Marines are pretty big on taking oil samples and then having it tested. In fact, I saw a report recently where now they're doing that at the base. Before, they would send it out to a separate service, and they would have the oil tested, but it was taking too long. And by the time the results came back, the truck was gone out of the motor pool. And so now they bought the equipment and they're doing the testing on base. And so they can get the results within an hour or two. And so there are those drain valves on the truck, and that's what I used to drain off the extra 2 gallons that were in there. And it worked pretty good. Those valves put out the oil at a pretty good pace. So I didn't have to wait very long at all, and 2 gallons came off. It's a little bit windy today, sorry. Now, I did also tell you that I was going to be showing you how to check the oil level from the cab. And it turns out that my particular truck, which has the first generation, the earlier model of transmission and the transmission control, doesn't have the oil sensor in the transmission, and so I can't, on my truck, check the oil level of the transmission from the cab. So I'm not able to show you that. And I have not yet put in the Seafoam to clean out the transmission. In fact, recently I just took it out into the desert, the Utah desert, and drove it around because it's been quite a while since the transmission's really been up to the operating temperature. And driving it around town, it just doesn't seem to get above 160, which is the bottom of the gauge. So the gauge really never moves anywhere. So I drove it out to the desert to make sure that it would get up to like 180 or 200, and it did. And I think the transmission's shifting even better now. So I'm not sure if I'll use the Seafoam or not. So I guess stay tuned. I'll put some comments down below if I ever do that and what the results are. And speaking of results, I did take a sample of the transmission fluid before I drained it all out. So it was, I'm assuming 15W40 that was in there, and it probably was. So I use Blackstone, and I've used them for a long time for other vehicles, and I think they do a pretty good job, and they're not too expensive. They seem reasonably priced. So I sent it in. There isn't really too much on here. I mentioned to them that it looked like there was water and it looked like it was dirty, that I could see some grit or something in there. And they came back and they said, no, we didn't see any water and we didn't really see any particulates in there. They did call out some abnormal readings, though. It seemed like there was a little bit more iron than normal and a lot more copper. Not sure where the copper would come from, but actually I've changed other fluids in the truck and it had high copper also. So something's kind of strange. Maybe the mechanics is a joke, dumped a bunch of copper in there or something. The oil also, so this 15W40, the 15W40 that the military uses, seems to have an additive package in it because three additives came up very high. Calcium, phosphorus, and zinc are very high in the 15W40 that was in this truck in the transmission. The Marines use the same 15W40 for everything, the engine, the power steering, the transmission, everything. I think they have some different reasons for that. I don't need to do that, so I put automatic transmission fluid in here, as I mentioned before. So it seems like they're using an old formulation of the 15W40 oil, or maybe they have an additive package. Of course, the Marines, the military buys so much oil, they can tell the refinery exactly how they want it. And it's delivered by pipeline, of course, to the bases, to the big bases. So yeah, they can tell them exactly what they want the oil formulation to be. So I think that's it. I've given you a good overview on how to change the transmission fluid in an MTVR. For sure, check out Steel Soldiers. There's a great bunch of people on there and a lot of great information about how these trucks work and how to fix things. And I post there quite a bit, and I'll have any more information that I can figure out about the transmission. So check out Steel Soldiers.